The Right Side with Doug Billings.
Coming to you from smack dab in the middle of the fruited plain, where you become members of the most intellectually mature audience in all of Radioland, precisely because you listen to the shows and programming on this network. Today, January 6th, 2026, and I need to just very quickly mention, of course, the anniversary that we are experiencing today, and predictably, much of the media is reliving that day, January 6, 2021, louder than ever, right? But so I'm not here to rehash what every network is already shouting about. I'm much more interested in why certain moments are endlessly replayed while others are quietly ignored. And that question ties directly to what we're talking about today, the difference between spectacle and strategy. So let's dive into the right side. Today, I want to talk to you about something that almost everyone feels, but very few people can put this into words. There's been a shift, a real shift in this country, not a headline shift, not a breaking news cycle shift. I think it's more of a psychological shift. It's a strategic shift and a tone shift, really, in this country. And if you've felt like I have that you've sensed it all along, folks, you are not crazy. You're perceptive, and congratulations, because something has changed. People are restless. They're impatient. They're asking questions like, why does it feel quieter out there in the world? Why isn't more happening? Why aren't things moving faster? And meanwhile, the media feels angrier. They feel more frantic. They feel desperate. And that combination, public impatience that's paired with institutional panic, is not random, my friends. It is a tell. Any of you have ever played poker? The tell. It is a tell. And here's the key idea that I want to hold on to today, and I want you to remember. The loudest phrases in history are almost never the most important ones. In fact, it's really usually the opposite. In my opinion, as I look at history, the moments that change everything rarely announce themselves, with fireworks, right? They arrive quietly. They feel slow, and they test our patience. And that's exactly where we are right now. Most people are conditioned and trained to believe that power looks loud. They think power looks like constant announcements, daily drama, public showdowns, endless spectacle. But that's not how real power operates. That's how distraction operates. So let me tell you something that history teaches us all very clearly. Those of you that listen to the show know that I love history, and the media will never teach you this. When a system feels threatened, my friends, it gets loud. And when a system is executing strategy, it gets very quiet. And right now, the people screaming the loudest are the ones losing control. So I'm going to look at this slowly and surely with you, pace by pace, because it's important. This ties into every news story of the day, everything that's going on within the state of play in America. This topic today, in fact, this might be one of the most important shows that I've ever given. So when I say strategy phase, I'm not talking about politics the way that the cable news talks about politics. I'm not talking about polling. I'm not talking about talking points. I'm talking about how power actually works across centuries in history, not news cycles that last 5 days or less. Every major turning point in history follows a pattern, ladies and gentlemen. And that pattern looks something like this. First comes the chaos. Then comes clarity. Then comes consolidation. Okay. And only after that comes visible action. Most people only recognize that last phase because that's the part that makes noise. But by the same time the noise starts, the outcome is many times, in fact, often, already decided. And that's why people get confused. They think nothing is happening when in the reality of it all, everything that matters is happening. Just not where the cameras are pointed. Look, chaos is emotional. Strategy is disciplined. Chaos wants attention right now. It demands it. Strategy is willing to wait. Chaos feeds impatience. Strategy feeds inevitability. And inevitability brings an uncomfortable truth. Impatience, when you are impatient, and impatience in general, it is the one weapon that the enemy always has left. That's why frustration is being amplified right now. That's why people are being nudged into doubt. And that's why certain voices are whispering, if nothing dramatic happens soon, maybe nothing is happening at all. And that voice is not wisdom, ladies and gentlemen. That voice is a trap. Because historically speaking, when a movement loses because of impatience, it almost never becomes a movement that lacked numbers, or it's not really a movement that even may have lacked truth. It's because it lost discipline at the first line. And the first line for us is the finish line. It's got to be. And so let me say it again, maybe in a slightly different way, because it matters. Most victories are not stolen. They are abandoned by people who mistake silence for failure. And today's show is about making sure that does not happen. Not on the right side, because by the time we're done today, you're going to be able to recognize the difference between noise and signal, the difference between delay and defeat, and the difference between nothing happening and everything being set. By the end of the program, you're going to know how to tell when a strategy phase is underway and when and why this exact moment right now feels the way that it does.
Valvoline Express Care. They are locally owned and operated. It's clean and they are really friendly and well-staffed.
Welcome.
I just stayed in my car and was able to work and feel safe and comfortable. It was really fast and they are powered by the brand you trust, Valvoline. Open Monday through Friday, 8 till 6, Saturday, 8 till 5. Valvoline Express Care in Warrenton, Troy, Illinois, Lee May Ferry, and 2 new locations. St. Peter's on Mid-Rivers Mall Drive by DQ, and also St. Peter's Parkway.
In author Katie Lee's new novel, Tracing a Kidnapper's Trail, a mother has been murdered and her young daughter abducted. Search and rescue expert Hunter Shelton and his canine partner Libby launch a relentless manhunt for a child that could be his. Order Tracing a Kidnapper's Trail, a thrilling Christian romantic suspense for $7.99. Visit katieleebooks.com for Tracing a Kidnapper's Trail today. And get ready to stay up late reading.
Winter's coming. Is your home ready? Stay warm and save money with iFoam insulation. From spray foam to fiberglass and cellulose blown-in insulation, iFoam's experts seal every draft and boost your comfort all season long. Call iFoam today at 636-434-1352 or visit iFoam.com/O'Fallon-MO for your free insulation estimate. iFoam, smarter insulation, better comfort.
Looking to transform your health and feel your best? At Jones Air and Water, we believe true wellness goes beyond clean air and water. It's about what you put in your body. That's why my dad, Everett Jones, and myself have teamed up. As a nutritionist, I offer personalized coaching, holistic nutrition plans, and real sustainable results. Whether you're looking to eat better, boost energy, or take control of your health, reach us at 636-899-1040 or visit joneswater.com and check out the nutrition tab.
Drew and Dan in the morning, I just can't get enough of, and I love listening to Ryan. The whole day, I have it on.
The Real Talk Radio Network.
The right side is upon you, ladies and gentlemen. We stand shoulder to shoulder, you and I, and we help one another escape the nightmare of liberalism to the world of conservatism, where wonder, joy, and meaning await us all. So, you're going to understand some things by the end of this program today. I really do think this is one of the most important topics that I have spoken about on this show. I really do. You're going to understand why things feel slower today in the news cycle in the state of play in America, why headlines feel thinner, and why the media feels absolutely unhinged, and why steady people, not panicked people, will shape our future. So today, what the strategy phase really is. Somebody contribute to my show, because my chair, do you ever a chair, your office chair that has an air compressed, lift on it up and down? My the air cylinder, whatever it's called, it's broken. So my chair slowly sinks down. So if you see me, if you're watching the program, there you go. There's the explanation. The strategy phase. I'm going to do something more important than establish that something has shifted. I'm going to define what the shift really is in America and in many ways around the world, because confusion thrives when definitions are vague, and clarity is lethal to manipulation. Most people think that they understand strategy, but my gosh, my friends, they just don't. They confuse activity with strategy, and they confuse motion with progress, and they confuse noise with power. And that misunderstanding leads to a lot of frustration, and I'm sure many of you feel it, which then leads to us making mistakes. So let's define it clearly. Strategy is not reaction. Reaction responds to events after they happen, obviously, right? Strategy shapes conditions before events occur. Reaction is emotional. Strategy is intentional. And reaction is very loud. Strategy is patient and usually very quiet. So, a simple truth that history proves to us over and over again: the more powerful an operation is, the less it advertises itself. So why is that? Because advertising, ladies and gentlemen, invites interference. Think about this for a minute with me. Walk with me here. When someone is bluffing, they talk. When someone's serious, they move quietly. And when someone is executing a long-term plan, they remove themselves from that emotional cycle altogether. That is called strategy. And let's look, because people get lost in this topic. Most Americans have been trained by the media, by politics, by entertainment to expect constant stimulation. Updates. We got to have updates. We want news alerts. Where's the outrage? Where's the breaking news banners? We've been trained to expect all of that. Stimulus. The environment conditions the mind to believe that progress has to be visible and in real time. But strategy, it just does not work that way. Real strategy, I'll put it like this. Real strategy works in layers, okay? And those layers almost always unfold in this order. First, information. Second, positioning. Third, pressure. And then fourth, resolution. The public, we, the people, we usually only see that last stage, resolution. And when the earlier stages are happening quietly, people assume that nothing is happening at all. Why don't we have more arrests? You know, that kind of thing. So let me put it another way. Strategy is about creating inevitability, not excitement, not catharsis, not viral moments, and not speeches that are designed only to go viral on social media. Inevitability. And inevitability does not require constant explanation. I mean, in a lot of ways, expecting too much weakens all of that. I think a key distinction that matters right now in America and among us as conservatives, reaction seeks to be validated. Strategy seeks outcomes, okay? And reaction wants the headlines. It wants applause and recognition, right? Strategy doesn't care if it's understood. It only cares that it works. That's why real strategy, a lot of the time to us, it feels uncomfortable because a lot of people become emotionally invested in certain stories or whatever. But it's designed reaction to do just that. Because, you know, I think strategy denies one thing to the people that they crave the most. And that's why they get into a little bit of a panic mode. And it denies them, strategy does, it denies them immediate gratification. So let me introduce you to a word. And no one is talking, you've heard the word, but no one is talking about this word. No one's talking about this word at all, but it matters very much. And that word is sequencing. Sequencing. It means doing the right things in the right order at the right time. We can have the right goal and still fail if we move too early. We can have the truth and we can still lose it if we deploy it before the conditions for it are set. And history, my friends, is filled with movements that were correct and were still crushed because they lacked patience. That's why strategy always looks slower than reaction. Because reaction fires everything at once, right at us. And strategy applies pressure where it can't be relieved. Here's another truth that the media never tells you. Silence is not the absence of action. Silence really is often the absence of permission to interfere. When nothing is being announced, when timelines are not being promised, and when the public figures involved stop narrating every move, that's often when the real work behind the scenes begins. So power, real power, ladies and gentlemen, it's not political theater. It is not a popularity contest. It's not clickbait. It's not ratings. Institutional power. Institutional power does not move by, nor is it controlled by emotions. It moves procedurally and it works through systems. And it applies pressure through law, through process, through precedent, and through structure. And when institutional power is activated correctly, it doesn't need to shout. It only needs to persist. That's why strategy in the when you're going through the phases of strategy, it sometimes feels boring to us. You know, boring to people who might be addicted to spectacle. Because there's no villain being chased on camera. There's no dramatic countdown clock. There's no perp walks. Oh my gosh. And no instant gratification. Just pressure behind the scenes. Quiet, steady, unavoidable pressure.
The Right Side with Doug Billings.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. The Right Side with Doug Billings, doing what I was called by God to do. Restoring the Republic, one breath at a time, one move at a time. With your help, we are recovering the Republic away from the nightmare that was cast upon us by the radical liberal movement in this country. And I mean that. We are. And I appreciate you being out there. I want to tell you also, because I care, the good people at Community Financial Services Group are there to help you. They've got 35 years of experience doing this, looking at your financial plan for the future, for current day, for your family, your wife, your husband, your kids, grandkids, wills and trusts, all of it, educational funding. They'll give you a free analysis of your current financial plan if you give them a call. My good friends at Community Financial Services Group, give them a call, 816-322-2760. 816-322-2760. 816-322-2760. Tell them that you heard about them from us right here on the Right Side. All right. Just before the break, I'm telling you, time is not the enemy here. Time is the weapon. Okay? Because when we're talking about reaction and strategy and the current state of play in America, and sometimes these truths, I never tell you anything that's not true. There are those out there that will accept them, and then there are the intellectually immature who will not. Now, it's not our duty to make fun of people who are currently imprisoned by intellectual immaturity. It's our duty to walk them into the room of reality and truth, and we do that because we're on the track to bring as many people to the truth as we can. That is our purpose. So when we think about time and strategy and reaction, I think it's fair to remind ourselves that reaction is afraid of time. Strategy uses time, ladies and gentlemen. Reaction burns through energy real quickly. You ever notice that? And strategy conserves energy, and it applies it precisely and surgically. And when you hear people say, like, why is this taking so long? Why, if they were serious, this work would already be done. Nothing has happened yet. What those people are really saying is, I've mistaken speed for strength. And the hard truth, but an important one, is that fast outcomes feel good, right? But durable outcomes last. That's exactly why you saw the radical left movement in this country throw dozens of fictitious charges at Trump and his inner circle and his family. And every one of them were thrown out or overturned. We don't do that over here. Real appeal-proof cases that bear convictions that last take time, and you've got to get used to it and accept it. That is not kicking the can down the road. That is why strategy phases always test the faithful. They separate those who believe in the process from those who only believe in emotion. And they reveal who understands how power works and who only understands how outrage feels. It separates them. People who know how power works and then who only understand outrage. So if you feel impatient right now, my dear friends, if you feel uneasy, if you feel like things should be moving faster, that doesn't mean that something's wrong. It means that you're inside the most difficult phase of any long struggle. The phase where discipline matters more than excitement. I mean, this is crucial. How the media then, we think about the media, how they betray themselves during the strategy phases. because I think it's incredibly revealing what the media is saying versus how the media is behaving. Because when a strategy phase is underway, when we're in the midst of a good strategy, the press always gives itself away. It can't help it. And the first rule about this that you need to understand is that the media does not report power shifts. It reacts to them. Get the difference? And it usually reacts late. When the media feels confident, it behaves in a certain way. It sounds smug. It might sound dismissive. It'll sound relaxed. It may laugh. It may mock. And it tells you there's nothing to see here. But when control begins to slip, even slightly, the tone changes, and it changes fast. Suddenly, everything is a threat to the democracy. Billings, you're on the Real Talk Radio Network. You guys are a threat to our democracy. We're facing unprecedented danger. This is an emergency. Breaking news, right? This is a crisis. Go on and on and on. Even when nothing dramatic is actually happening, that's how they react when their power begins to slip away. That emotional mismatch is the tell, ladies and gentlemen. If nothing is happening, there's no need for panic. If something is happening quietly, their panic becomes their cover. And so I'll say it very clearly. Media hysteria is not strength. It is the loss of the control of their narrative. And Trump is delivering that by bucket loads. When institutions feel secure, they don't scream. They explain. They contextualize. They slow things down. But when institutions feel threatened, they rush, they exaggerate, they moralize the issues, and they try to exhaust you emotionally. That is not journalism, ladies and gentlemen. That's defensive behavior. And we've seen that pattern repeatedly. Every time a narrative monopoly starts, whenever those start to fracture, the media does three things almost like clockwork. First, it accelerates the news cycle because it wants to get it behind them. Second, it amplifies emotion over facts. And third, I guess I want to say it demonizes, it demonizes your patience. If you're patient, you're a kook. Think about that last one. They demonize patience. Ladies and gentlemen, patience is dangerous to them. A calm population is impossible to manipulate. A disciplined population doesn't fall for clickbait. And a people like you and I who understand strategy don't react on their cue. So what does the media do? It tries to convince you that waiting is weakness, that silence is failure, that if something isn't being screamed about, it must not exist. That framing serves exactly one purpose: to pull you back into reaction mode. And here's another important distinction. When the media knows something for sure, it reports facts. When it suspects something that it can't yet control, it speculates. And when it fears something, it projects motives, projects and gaslights. And you'll notice an increase in language like, well, they're trying to, fill in the blank. This could lead to, nuclear war, whatever, right? Experts are warning, or sources say. I love that one. Always the sources. Sources say. Well, that is not certainty, ladies and gentlemen. That is anxiety. And you want to talk about volume. because we see it, right? Volume's important because it really does matter. When the media repeats the same story over and over again without any new information, that is not reporting. That is reinforcement. And we see it every day. And the same networks say the same thing because they have meetings. They really do. They are held by the radical left liberal hierarchy, and the media is given talking points. They're not trying to inform you. They're trying to condition you to keep your nervous system activated, to keep you angry, to keep you impatient, and to keep you demanding more spectacle. Because here's the truth the media doesn't want you to realize. Spectacle protects corruption. It distracts, it divides, and it burns energy. Quiet processes, on the other hand, they expose corruption, my friends. They apply pressure, they build records, and they create accountability. And accountability is the one thing that this corrupt system cannot survive. And I'm not just talking about the media. I'm talking about the corrupt liberal hierarchy and all of their players. And a critical insight, I think, that's good to remind ourselves of and to say, when the media starts arguing against outcomes that haven't happened yet, when it starts preemptively condemning actions that nobody has announced, and when it starts writing the moral verdict before any evidence at all even exists, that, my friends, is fear talking out loud. They're not responding to reality. They're responding to possibility. And that tells you something enormous. It tells you that they don't control the sequence anymore. Sequence. Remember what I said earlier. Strategy works in layers, and the media only thrives when it can interrupt those layers, when it can insert emotion, when it can provoke reaction, and when it can force preemptive exposure.
The Right Side with Doug Billings.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the set of my show, Doug Billings. Hey, my good friends at EMP Shield, that's electromagnetic pulse, in case you're from Raytown, Missouri. Electromagnetic pulse could wipe out your home electrical system, could wipe out your vehicle. And thanks to the radical liberal agenda that was put forth under Administrator Biden and Vice Pretender Harris, there are lots of people in this country who want to do us harm. And maybe an EMP device would be their chosen weapon. But EMP Shield gives you a device that can protect you. This little baby here goes on your home outlets, a computer, a router, whatever you want to protect. And then they also have a larger model like this. You can still hold it in the palm of your hand that goes on your vehicle battery so that you can get out of trouble from point A to point B. EMPshield.com. Promo code Doug, ladies and gentlemen. Save yourself. Save your property. EMPshield.com. Promo code Doug. We're in this together, folks. Believe it. For the Republic. Cheers.
The Right Side with Doug Billings.
I left you telling you that restrain matters a lot right now because every time you refuse to act on cue, every time you refuse to panic, every time you refuse to demand some sort of a spectacle, perp walks, throw them in Gitmo, all this stuff. Every time you deny all of that, and every time you refuse to give that, you deny the kooks oxygen. And watch what happens when oxygen is denied, especially to the kooks in the media. Their rhetoric, some people say rhetoric, that gets more extreme, doesn't it? Have you noticed this? All of a sudden, the accusations get broader. The language gets darker. And it's not because they're winning. It's because they're losing control of the tempo. And tempo also matters. Who sets the pace matters. And right now, the people screaming the loudest are not setting it. They're chasing it. So let me make this personal just for a minute. If you've ever thought to yourself, why do they sound so frantic these days? Or why does everything feel so exaggerated out there? Or why does this tone that I'm hearing feel so unhinged? That's your instincts, ladies and gentlemen. Congratulations. And it's picking up something real because confidence doesn't have to shout. Confidence doesn't have to moralize an issue. It doesn't have to threaten anybody. It doesn't demand urgency every single day of the week and in every news cycle. Only insecurity does that. So when you hear the hysteria, when you hear moral panic, when you hear endless warnings without evidence, don't assume that means danger is imminent, okay? Often, and very, very, very realistically, almost always, it means control is slipping quietly somewhere else. And that brings us to the most dangerous moment in any long struggle. Not when the enemy is loud, but when they are provoking impatience. Because impatience makes people do stupid things. It makes them abandon discipline, it makes them demand shortcuts, and it makes them expose strategy prematurely. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in the next hour, because impatience is not an accident when it's used against us. It is the last pressure tactic that's available to those people who are running out of options. That's the God-given truth. That's the analysis you're not going to hear anywhere else except right here on the Real Talk Radio Network. It is factual, it is historical, it's honest, and it's absolutely verifiable. Your impatience has got to be controlled. Otherwise, you're going to make mistakes. You cannot urge a long-term strategy into defaulting into expeditious results. I got into a conversation the other day about specifically Pam Bondi and Kash Patel because there are a lot of people out there calling for their heads. Now, they've only been confirmed and in office for 9 months. So right there, look what they've done. And they've set records with regards to how many people they've arrested. Now, I know there's people out there you want to see arrested. I know you're talking about, Obama, Brennan, Clapper, Strzok, Christopher Wray, Hillary Clinton. We can go down a list. I get it. I understand. Barack Obama. Oh my gosh. But again, I will remind you, we are reacting when we shout out for that kind of justice. And I'm not saying that kind of justice is wrong. I'm just saying that demanding it right now. They've been in there for 9 months. We've seen evidence for 8 years, Doug. How long does this republic have to endure all of this? Well, we might have known of the evidence for 8 years, but look who was in control. In the first term, Donald Trump didn't have, he didn't know the game. He didn't know it like he knows it now. Look at the difference between his first and second term. I think both of them are effective, don't get me wrong, but the second one is far more so. So he knows the game, and then you had before him, you had Bushes and the Clintons. I mean, my gosh, you're not going to see the kind of justice you want with Bushes in control and with Clinton, with Obama, with Biden. Come on. So while the evidence may have been there, we didn't have people there who were going to act on the evidence. And when we do have people that are there ready to act, it takes time to build cases that are bulletproof against appeals. It takes time to build cases that are conviction worthy and that whose convictions will last and won't get overturned or thrown out. James Comey thrown out on a technicality by a liberal judge because the Senate is jacking around with their blue check nonsense, not confirming Trump appointees. And so there was the whack job liberal judge threw out the Comey case because there wasn't the proper appointment. It's a technicality. And I know that there's timelines with, the statute of limitations and so forth. But have faith in Trump first. Have faith in what strategy and tempo mean, and know how the media and the talking heads out there, and when I say talking heads, I mean even the people who claim to be on our side, who are out there on social media, throwing out nonsense, clickbait, just nonsense. And they excite, even tier one people have been saying, things like, why isn't Bondi acting, why isn't he acting faster? I've seen very reputable people. And for those of you who saw General Flynn on my show a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this, and he said, I grant you that, Doug. I grant you that they might be actually putting together cases that are bulletproof for appeals and convictions that will last. We have to give them time to do that because the fiction that was thrown at Trump didn't last. We don't want that. So because my friend, General Flynn, was calling for heads of people like Bondi and Patel, and so we kind of talked each other in to the same room on that topic. But that's where we all need to be. We all need to be in that room. We need to guard ourselves against emotional response, and the urge that sometimes is, I grant you, human nature to want things now. If we don't see anything happening, there must be nothing happening. That's not intellectual maturity. It's the opposite. And so, again, this program, this network, it's all about the truth. It's all about putting things out in a logical order. And my show specifically, analysis of the state of play in America. You can't get it anywhere else. It's right here. And it's part of the reason why I was kicked off of YouTube 4 years ago. For the love of all that's good. Yeah, I'm too conservative because I spoke out against the theft of an American presidential election, and I looked into the COVID nonsense. I came from the healthcare industry. I was fired precisely because I didn't draft the policies that the executive committee wanted me to draft that would have shut services down and run the risk of making people sicker. So I talked about all of that calmly, collectively, with evidence, and YouTube cancels me. So where the media is. Now I'm back on YouTube. I get the obligatory letter because Jim Jordan and the Congress had put pressure on YouTube to invite people like me back. So I got the letter. Hey, Doug, Mr. Billings, we made a mistake. So head over to YouTube. I encourage you and find me at The Right Side, Doug Billings. You'll get supplements to what we do here on the Real Talk Network. This right here is where the most important things happen.
The Right Side with Doug Billings.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. The Right Side with Doug Billings, coming to you from smack dab in the middle of the fruited plain. I'm glad you're here. Look, strategy phases always involve patience. It's not an easy topic to listen to, perhaps. I think it's perhaps the most important topic one of the most important topics that I've discussed on this program. Because after all, ladies and gentlemen, let's just admit right now that every topic that I discuss is important, but this one happens to rank above some of the others. Now, in all seriousness, strategy phases always leave fingerprints. So be aware of that. They always reveal themselves to us. You just have to know where to look. So I want to talk about the tells. How do we know stuff is happening? The clear and repeatable signs that tell you that strategy phases are underway, whether the media or clickbait artists admit it or discuss it or not. Tell number one, the noise begins to disappear where once the noise dominated. Okay, so this one throws people off because we've been trained to believe that if something matters, it's got to be consistently talked about. But in reality, when something really matters, ladies and gentlemen, the talking stops. Public commentary dries up and specific promises disappear. Timelines all of a sudden evaporate. And suddenly you notice that the loudest voices have moved on to other distractions. That's not abandonment necessarily. That's containment. When strategy is active, information becomes controlled, not leaked, not hyped, and not debated publicly, because open discussion invites interference. And I am not talking about suppressing your Second or your First Amendment rights. So if you notice silence where you expected there to be celebration, or restraint where you expected boasting, that's not failure. Folks, that is called discipline. Tell number two, law replaces language. This is critical, very critical. Reaction lives in rhetoric. Strategy lives in process. When a movement is reacting, everything happens in front of microphones. When a movement is executing its strategy, things move into paperwork, procedure, jurisdiction, authority, and sequence. There's less talk and more filing, less outrage and more structure. And here's the key. Process is boring by design. It filters out the spectators, and it exhausts the manipulators. And it really does prevent emotional hijacking of issues. So if you find yourself thinking, why is this so dull? Why is something not happening? That's often because your signal within you is telling you or nudging you to believe that something real is happening. Tell number 3. Pressure shifts from public to institutional. That's where people really get confused. They expect confrontation, and instead they get pressure, quiet pressure, sustained pressure, pressure that does not trend on social media, but pressure that doesn't release anything either. Institutions start behaving differently. Lawyers get careful. Statements get sanitized. Risk aversion is on the increase. And people who once upon a time spoke freely suddenly hedge and they clam up. That's not confidence. That's defensive posturing. The public bravado begins to fade and private caution grows. And that tells you that pressure is being applied where it matters. Tell number 4. The media becomes repetitive and speculative. Now, I touched a little bit on this earlier, but I want now to recognize this in real time. When the media knows something, it reports facts. When it suspects something, it speculates. And when it fears something, it loops. It loops it continually on the loop. The same story, the same guests, the same warnings, the same phrases, but a different day. No new facts, no new evidence, just repetition. That is not journalism, ladies and gentlemen. That is what's called anxiety management. They're trying to fill silence with noise because silence makes them nervous. Tell number 5. The public grows impatient while the insiders grow quiet. This is one of the strongest indicators, ladies and gentlemen, because the public doesn't see the machinery. It only feels the waiting, right? So impatience rises. Voices demand speed. People ask for the spectacle. Meanwhile, those closest to the process say less. They don't tease the subject. They don't posture the subject. And they don't reassure anybody publicly. At least not always. That silence is not them being arrogant. It's not them being incompetent. It is legal and it is strategic and it's a necessity. Real operations don't narrate themselves, my friends. Real operations conclude themselves. Tell number 6. Emotion is redirected outward. Watch carefully. Watch carefully. When frustration is encouraged, but it's aimed sideways, right? At allies, at institutions, at patience itself. When people begin to attack you because you are patient. You know, our Republican movement, our conservative movement has a bad habit of circling the wagons and firing inward at ourselves. When people are nudged to fight each other, when unity amongst us is mocked, and when restraint is criticized, it's almost always an attempt to fracture discipline. Divide the patient, divide the movement, provoke their emotions, force exposure. That's the play every time. That's it, right out of the playbook. And here's the most important tell of all, tell number 7. Nothing feels finished, but nothing feels chaotic either. That's the hardest phase for us emotionally because it sits between chaos and resolution. The chaos has cooled down a bit, perhaps, but the victory hasn't yet appeared. What is going on? And people mistake this middle ground for stagnation. It's not.
The Right Side with Doug Billings.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Doug Billings, The Right Side. Thanks for being here with us, where we are saving the republic with every breath we take and every move we make. You and me in this thing together. So this phase that we're in, the things that it involves, and I know that it's uncomfortable because it requires on a lot of levels that we trust. And I know that our trust has been busted so often over the last 8 years, especially. But I don't think that it's asking for just blind trust. I don't think that this process and what we're waiting for is asking for that. I think it's asking for informed trust. Trust that's built on understanding how power actually works. Because once you see those tells that I mentioned to you in the previous block, once you recognize the pattern, you stop being confused. You stop being manipulated, and you stop reacting to the tone of it all. And I think, finally, you stop demanding the spectacle of things. You become steady. And a steady people don't panic. They wait, they watch, and they endure. Because the understanding that they have is something fundamental. Strategy doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself after it's irreversible. That's what we're waiting for example, from Pam Bondi, announcing that things will stick and that they will be irreversible, not like what the left did to us. All of that was overturned and thrown out. So history is the proof of all of this. In my opinion, this is how real change actually happens. Opinions, the opinions that we all have, they can be argued, but history doesn't lie to us. When I look at history, I think one of the greatest mistakes that people make is that they believe that their moment in history is unique, that somehow the rules of human behavior and power have changed for them in their moment. But ladies and gentlemen, they haven't. Technology changes, language changes, but human nature doesn't, and neither does the way real change occurs. History has shown us time and time again that the most decisive shifts almost never look dramatic. They almost never look dramatic when they're happening, folks. In fact, they often look disappointing. They're quiet. They might seem to be incomplete, and they might seem to be even, quite frankly, boring. A first example, think about the American founding. Most people imagine the Revolutionary period as a long, fiery uprising, right? Speeches, battles, declarations. But that's not what sustained it. What sustained it was years of committee work, of correspondence, of legal arguments, slow coalition building, and quiet negotiations that the public never saw or heard about. The loud moments get remembered, undoubtedly, yes. The quiet ones make victory possible. After the Declaration of Independence, many Americans in this country thought that, well, that's it. Now everything changes. But it didn't. There were long stretches, my friends, where nothing seemed to move at all. The war dragged on, resources were scarce, morale dipped severely. But behind the scenes, strategy was unfolding, alliances were forming, institutions were being built, and foundations for the entire republic were being laid. And when the outcome finally became visible, It was already decided. So let's move forward in time. What about the collapse of the Soviet Union? From the outside, it looked very sudden, didn't it? One moment, a superpower right here. The next, poof, they're gone. Huh? What? What happened? Do svidaniya. Bring me the vodka. But the real collapse didn't happen on television, my friends. It happened quietly over years. Economic pressure, legal erosion, institutional fatigue, loss of confidence, Pope John Paul II, Lech Walesa, all of that over time. No dramatic announcements. Today is the last day of the Soviet Union, ladies and gentlemen. It simply just couldn't hold itself together anymore. That's what strategic pressure does. It doesn't explode systems. It exhausts them, my friends. One more example, an example that a lot of people out there misunderstand. And I give you this to arm you with truth. The civil rights movement. Okay, most people focus on the, X, or what's his name? Malcolm X, and Dr. King, the speeches, the marches, and all of those mattered, but that wasn't the strategy. The strategy was legal, court cases, incremental rulings, and procedural victories. Now, those things didn't necessarily all make headlines, and they didn't satisfy anybody who was impatient, but they changed reality. And the key point, if the movement, the civil rights movement, if it had relied only on spectacle, it would have burned itself out. And instead, it paired up moral clarity with procedural endurance. That's not coincidence, by the way. That is the pattern of how things work. What about something closer to home for us? Every major corporation scandal in American history followed the same arc. At first, denial, then mockery, then dismissal, okay? Then what happens? Silence, legal maneuvering, and careful language, very careful language. And only after the pressure became unavoidable, then there's resolution. What you never see a corrupt system say, you caught us. Well, by God, congratulations. We're all finished here. That's not how power works. Power resists. Power then adjusts, and then it retreats quietly. History's filled with moments where people thought nothing is happening and later realized everything that mattered was already in motion. Wow, it's called hindsight. And here's another truth that history teaches. The longer that something takes, the more durable the outcome usually is. Fast changes might excite the mob, and slow change reshapes civilization. That's why revolutions oftentimes fail, and restorations endure. Revolutions burn hot, absolutely. They consume themselves. They replace the chaos with another chaos. Restorations, they move carefully. They rebuild the norms, and they re-anchor principles, and they stabilize. Restoration always feels underwhelming to us while it's happening. And that's because restorations don't have as its leading goal the thrill of it all. It's not about spectacle. Their main goal is to last. And let me say something important that history does not reward, and that is that history does not reward those who demand speed. It rewards those who maintain discipline. When speed might be tempting, we maintain the discipline. Every failed movement had people saying, we need to act now. Every successful movement, on the other hand, had leaders saying, not yet, not yet. And the gap between those two instincts determines everything. So when people tell you today, or they say to you, if this were real, it would already be obvious. History says otherwise, folks. History says otherwise. When people say, why can't we just force this to happen right now? History warns against that. And when people say, I'm tired of this waiting, our DOJ's broken, history argues gently but firmly, endurance wins the race, and impatience destroys everything that you're working for. This is not theory. This is not Doug Billings' opinion. This is pattern recognition across the centuries. And that's why you should take comfort right now, not fear. Because the moment you're living feels exactly like the moments in history that later describes as turning points. We are in a turning point. Quiet, uncertain maybe, unfinished, absolutely. And that's always how it feels. Right before things become irreversible. Why doesn't justice look more dramatic? Why do we demand spectacle? Why does that often protect the very people we want to be held accountable?
The Right Side with Doug Billings.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Doug Billings here with you. The Right Side. Always, never enough time. Always a lot of topic and content, right? I appreciate you very much. For all of you on the app, thank you so much for being there on that. For all of you driving along in the car, listening at work, listening on the app, no matter where you are in the world, thank you for making Real Talk Radio Network your source for all of this. So I want to address, in the time that I've got left, the question that sits underneath almost every expression of frustration right now. And it usually sounds something like this. There's variations of it, but usually something close to, well, if justice were really happening, wouldn't it look a lot bigger than this? And so that is understandable. But my friends, it is also dangerous because justice and spectacle are not the same thing. In fact, they are often, in real life, direct and polar opposites. Spectacle is designed, of course, to be seen. Justice is designed to hold the line. Spectacle will satisfy our emotions, but justice satisfies the law. And the truth that most people do not want to hear is that spectacle feels good, but it rarely survives the appeal. And so let's talk about what spectacle looks like. It looks dramatic, it looks loud, it looks immediate, it looks like someone being paraded out in front of cameras. And because it feels emotionally satisfying, people assume that this must be justice, Doug. Hey, look. But history, again, teaches us something that's far less exciting. And it's far more effective. Real justice almost never announces itself in advance. Because announcing justice before it's complete warns the targets. It invites interference. It politicizes the outcomes, and it weakens the case. Spectacle may win a moment, but justice it has got to aim to win forever. And I mean forever. And here's where people get tripped up. They confuse accountability with entertainment, and it frustrates the heck out of me. They want to see something happen so that they can feel reassured. But reassurance is not the purpose of justice. Resolution is. Justice doesn't ask anybody, hey, how does this look? Justice asks, will this stand? And standing requires a process, documentation, evidence, just jurisdiction, timing, sequence, all those boring things, all those quiet things, all the things that don't trend on social media. And to put it plainly, if justice were loud from the very beginning, it would almost always fail at the end. Because loud Justice invites defenses. It mobilizes allies. It hardens opposition. And it gives corrupt systems time to regroup. Quiet justice does something very different. It builds pressure invisibly. It narrows the escape routes, and it removes options. By the time it becomes visible, there's nowhere left to run for the people who we want to hold accountable. So we address then the emotional argument head on. People will say, well, if nothing dramatic has happened, maybe nothing is happening at all. I'm done. I am done with the system. That logic doesn't hold up, folks, because the most consequential legal action in history almost always unfold quietly until the very last moment. When justice is done correctly, the first thing you see is not drama. It's finality. No long victory laps, no grandstanding. It's just done. That's why people who demand spectacle often end up unintentionally protecting the corruption. Because spectacle gives the guilty something to fight. Justice gives them nothing. And another hard truth, spectacle satisfies the crowd, but crowds don't decide cases. Process does. And process does not care. It doesn't give one rip how angry you are. It cares about how prepared you are. That's why impatience and spectacle always walk together, and they feed off of one another. Spectacle demands speed, absolutely. And speed demands shortcuts. Shortcuts destroy our desired outcomes. Justice, on the other hand, demands that we have discipline, and discipline demands patience. Now, I want to speak directly to you listeners out there, you guys who are saying, well, I don't want the entertainment. I want accountability. Good. That instinct is correct. But accountability doesn't come from yelling louder. It comes from removing the escape routes. It comes from making sure that when action happens, it can't be undone. It can't be reversed. It can't be dismissed. That's why real justice often feels like it's unsatisfying when we're in the moment, because it denies that emotional release. But when it delivers instead to us is permanence. And the key takeaway I want you to remember, if justice feels boring, if it feels procedural, and if it feels slow to you, it's probably being done correctly. If it feels thrilling and if it feels rushed, theatrical, there's always a soundbite. Gosh, we got plenty of things to click on social media. It's probably vulnerable. That's why you should be suspicious of anyone who promises dramatic justice on a timeline. We want retribution now, because justice doesn't promise timelines. It promises us outcomes, and outcomes require restraint. Your role is not to demand a spectacle. Your role as we the people is to hold discipline. That's what the founding fathers counted on from you. Because disciplined people protect outcomes, and impatient people sabotage them. Maybe not on purpose, but just because of their passion and their emotion. And when justice finally appears, and it will, it won't need any hype. It'll speak for itself. When we look at it this way, ladies and gentlemen, there's a great sense of peace, and trust begins to be rebuilt, because understanding that shapes our behavior. So the question isn't what's happening. The question is, how do we conduct ourselves while it's happening? History doesn't just judge outcomes, it judges character, most certainly. And character is revealed in moments of waiting. You want to talk plainly about what steady patriots do during this strategy phase that we're in? Not hypothetically, not emotionally, but practically. First, we're steady. We don't chase rumors. Steady patriots refuse to be divided, and we've got to stay united, my friends. We must stay united. Never enough time to talk about all that. I had so much more to talk with you about. But listen, the great, the wonderful Peggy Hubbard coming up next. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for inviting me into your space and listening to The Right Side. I'll see you tomorrow. God bless you. We're in this together. Believe it. Cheers.
The Right Side with Doug Billings.